Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey. I'm joined in the studio tonight by former MSP for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine, Maureen Watt. How are you this evening, Maureen?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. It's been a lovely day here. I think summer has come at last, so hope it's here to
Finally.
stay.
Finally, the sun has arrived. So, our first story for tonight, we have, as always, our Ukraine update. It's day 456 of the war. Russia has replaced its Wagner private military units with regular soldiers in the outskirts of Bakhmut, but the group's fighters remain inside the devastated city, the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said today. Her comments appeared at least partially to confirm an announcement by Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin that his group had started withdrawing its forces from Bakhmut in East Ukraine and handing over its position to regular Russian troops. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak sought to downplay the idea that there was going to be a counteroffensive coming from Ukraine that would be marked by a single significant shift of gear. He wrote once again about the counteroffensive. This is not a single event that will begin at a specific hour of a specific day with a solemn cutting of a red ribbon. Ukraine's defense ministry claimed to have shot down 36 out of 36 Shahad drones launched into Ukraine by Russia overnight. The Russian imposed head of Crimea's administration said today that air defenses had downed 6 drones overnight in different areas of the region. Russia, of course, illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. Russia and Belarus signed an agreement on the positioning of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus. Control over the weapons and the decision on their use is to remain with Moscow. The New York Times has reported that US intelligence officials believe that Ukraine was responsible for the drone attack which slightly damaged the Kremlin and which Russia labeled an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. The US ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, has criticized Russia over its implementation of the newly extended Black Sea Grain Initiative. Washington is looking into reports that American vehicles were used by Ukraine inside Russia, the White House spokesperson John Kirby told reporters on Wednesday. The Kremlin said the use of US made military hardware by pro Ukraine fighters in a raid on the Russian border region of Belgorod this week was testament to the West's growing involvement in the Ukraine conflict. Russian prosecutors have asked a court to recognize crimes committed by Nazi Germany in the Moscow region during the Second World War as a genocide against the peoples of the Soviet Union. Russia said today it would expel 5 Swedish diplomats in retaliation for what it calls Sweden's confrontational course after Sweden expelled 5 of Russia's diplomatic staff last month. Maureen, what do you make of the statement from Ukraine that this new offensive is not going to be a single action or a single directive? Do you think that that puts Ukraine in a more dangerous position now that they've backtracked on this new spring offensive?
Yes, for several weeks now, Ukraine have been saying that this spring offensive is coming, and it's nearly summer. Um, the reason for that was given that they were waiting for um, armaments to come from the West. And obviously, Ukrainian forces have to be trained in their use. So I was thinking about that today when I saw a map of Ukraine and wondering where they would start the offensive and how exactly it would pan out. I mean, do they start to try and take over Crimea and then work northwards and westwards? Um, or do they try and attack on various fronts? It'd be very interesting to see when it starts what the Ukrainians do intend to do, but hopefully pray that it's successful and this horrible war can be finished as soon as possible.
I couldn't agree with you more. So, moving on to our next story of tonight, the Chief Constable has said that Police Scotland is institutionally racist. At a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority at the Police Scotland headquarters in Tullian today, Chief Constable Sir Ian Livingston said that Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory in a public acknowledgement that has been welcomed by campaigners but prompted calls for actions. Excuse me. Mr. Livingston said, "It is right for me as Chief Constable to clearly state that there is institutional racism, sexism, misogyny, and discrimination that exist. Publicly acknowledging these issues exist institutionally is essential to our absolute commitment to championing equality and becoming an anti-racist service." Amar Anwar, the solicitor for the family of Sheku Bayu, who died in police custody on the 3rd of May 2015, issued a statement on their behalf. Mr. Anwar said, "It seems like a lifetime ago I made legal history in winning a civil action against Glasgow police for the racist attack, in which they smashed my front teeth out and told me this is what happens to black boys with big mouths." Mr. Anwar said that for too long, those in policing have refused to accept the undeniable fact that institutional racism exists, as those in uniform continued to rain blows of racism on our communities. He said that today's statement by the Chief Constable is a testament to the families like Sheku Bayu, Surjit Singh Chokha, and all of those who have struggled at the face of racial violence and injustice. Mr. Anwar added that the family of Sheku Bayu want to thank the Chief Constable for raising his voice to the truth and being brave enough to say what Black and Asian communities have known for decades. The Sheku Bayu family also want me to place record for thanks to the Chief Constable for his compassion and empathy, wishing him nothing but the best in his future. Fighting for a proper investigation, never mind achieving robust and meaningful change, has involved the Bayous in enormous challenges and obstacles at great personal cost to the emotional and physical health of their family, young and old. Their lives were changed forever on the 3rd of May 2015. However, the public inquiry into Sheku's death has still got a long way to go, and it would be inappropriate to comment further on that or reach any conclusions. The review by Dame Ailish Angiolini, Chief Constable, Casey, highlighted deep-rooted racism in Police Scotland, uncovering a hostile culture which discriminates against Black and Asian officers, but also female officers who continue to be victims of horrendous misogyny and at times sexual violence. Amar Anwar concluded by saying that the Chief Constable has set a challenge not just for Police Scotland, but to all of the police forces throughout the UK, especially the Metropolitan Police, who refuse to accept indisputable evidence of institutional racism. Maureen, what do you make of this announcement? Do you think that this is a step in the right direction for Police Scotland?
It's absolutely a step in the right direction, and it is groundbreaking, really, that Ian Livingston's the first Chief Constable to come out in the whole of the UK and admit that there's racism, discrimination, misogyny, and sexism within the force. Now, that doesn't mean that every single serving police constable or police officer is any of those things, but it's the culture, and it's obviously deep-rooted, and it's going to be extremely difficult to root out. But a bar has been set for the new Chief Constable to tackle that problem. I'm a bit perplexed as to why Ian Livingston would bring this up now. I mean, Ailish Angiolini's report was quite some time ago. So I find that a bit interesting, but we'll wait and see what comes out further from this. But it also gives the police authority a job to do to push this in the force, as I say, under a new Chief Constable.
Do you think the fact that he's bringing it up now and talking about the report now has anything to do with the fact that he's resigned and will be leaving the force?
Yeah, I don't know. I really, really don't know. It is interesting, as I say, that he's doing it just before he's resigning. Whether it's the heat of cases like Sheikh Obayu, I don't know. It was interesting that both Hamza Yusuf and the Labour leader um, talked about the racism that they experienced during First Minister's questions today. So um, clearly, it is a big problem, and it really needs to be rooted out from the police, because if it's not rooted out from such an important institution in our society as the police force, then it's it doesn't make it easier for other organisations and people who are trying to root it out to do so.
It needs to be first step in a larger kind of run of
Yeah,
policies.
yeah, yeah.
So, our next story. The ONS has released the net migration figures, and Rishi Sunak is now facing backlash from Conservative MPs after these net migration figures and the backlog of asylum claims reached record high when the latest ONS figures were published today. The Prime Minister was under immense pressure to concede to calls for immigration numbers to come down after the figures from the Office for National Statistics showed that overall migration into the UK for 2022 was at 600,000, which represents a 24% increase on the previous high of 488,000 last year. The UK Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, appeared to suggest processing claims faster could encourage more people to come to the UK through illegal routes after the Home Office figures showed more than 100,000 people had waited longer than 6 months for a decision. The rise in immigration had been largely fueled by people from the outside of the EU entering the UK to study, work, or escape conflict or oppression. According to the ONS data, the non-EU arrivals included 361,000 students and their families, 235,000 people coming for work-related reasons, and 172,000 coming on humanitarian schemes from countries like Ukraine, Hong Kong, and Afghanistan, as well as 76,000 people claiming asylum. Commenting, SNP Home Affairs spokesperson Alison Thulis said, "The Westminster obsession with net migration figures masks the fact that the UK government is failing to attract the talent we need in key sectors to boost our economy and NHS, showing why Scotland needs full powers of independence and control over migration." Damaging Tory and Labour Party Brexit and hostile environment policies have driven talent away and caused staffing shortages that have harmed our NHS, businesses and public services, leaving the people of Scotland worse off. Maureen, with these figures, what do you make of the Tory line that when these world events like the war in Ukraine and political unrest in Hong Kong, they're saying that net migration figures will drop because there'll be less people coming in on humanitarian schemes. What do you make of that line of argument?
I think, given the figures that you just read out, Saoirse, it's gone up from 488,000 to 606,000, and there are 172,000 on humanitarian grounds. That would account for the increase of those people coming from Hong Kong and Ukraine. And we know that the people from Ukraine would go back in a flash if the war was ended there. And we know that Hong Kong residents were given this right to come to Britain some time ago. Um, I think what disturbs me most is um, the decision that the families of university students can't come with them. I think that is absolutely cruel in the extreme. Um, and the idea that, that they're not going to go home if their families are with them, I don't think it is true at all. In fact, the wives and families are probably the ones who most want to go back to see their wider families. So I think that it will be detrimental, certainly to the universities, and the universities don't seem to have been consulted on this, and detrimental to people who we may well, from that cohort, want to stay in this country because of the skills that they have. This idea also that Robin Jenrick said that processing claims faster will encourage more people to come. I mean, what planet are they living on to suggest that that is a reason for coming? Honestly, I just don't know what planet these people are on, and the way that they're using migration as a political tool um, to appeal to the far right and people who don't want to see more people coming in, regardless of whether we need them for vital public services, I think is the lowest of the low.
It's a weaponization of minority by
Mm.
the Conservatives. And speaking of the Conservatives, where do you see the dynamics of the Conservative Party going? Do you think that this is going to separate the kind of more moderate Conservatives to the far right, and cause a split and a rift within Westminster and even in Holyrood as well?
Well, I think the Tories in Westminster have been split into two, if not three, factions for a long time. Obviously, Brexit is the main one. Um, and it's going to be difficult to see how Rishi Sunak is going to be able to do anything with that. I mean, I just don't think he is. I think he's just going to have to live with it, and it depends how many of whichever faction are returned. I think what also comes into the mix here is the fact that the Labour Party have not said that they're going to reverse any of the steps that the Tories have taken in government on migration. So they all seem to be going after the votes of this kind of right wing base, which is deeply disturbing, and why in Holyrood and in Scotland, I think we need to be rid of them completely. Um, I haven't got the feeling that this is spreading to the Tories in Scotland, but they clearly, because given their behaviour in the chamber in Holyrood, are getting deeply worried that they're falling into third place and are getting more angry and despicable by the day in their behaviour in the chamber in Holyrood.
And where should in an independent Scotland, where would you like to see the immigration policy take the country to?
Well, I think we know that up till 2006, the um, the population of Scotland was falling to at quite an alarming rate. And and to be fair, Jack McConnell started reversing that, and that has continued. We need people to come and work and live in Scotland because we have a low unemployment rate, and we simply don't have the people to do all the work that requires to be done. And this is important because if you don't have that, then you don't get the economic growth that you would want in your country, so that everybody can lift their standards of living, and that there can be more tax take for vital public services. So while we probably won't have an open door policy completely, I think the compassion and the humanitarian part that we play in Scotland, we've taken per head of population more Ukrainians, for example. I think it's important that we continue to be seen on the world stage as a welcoming country for people who are in distress and fleeing persecution.
Doesn't seem like too much to ask.
No.
um, So, our next story of the night, Ofgem has announced new energy price cap levels. The UK energy price cap has fallen to £2,074 a year, but the average household will still pay almost double the rate for their gas and electricity than before the cost started to soar. About 27 million households can expect a modest drop in energy bills this summer after the regulator Ofgem lowered the cap on typical annual dual fuel tariffs to reflect a steep drop in global energy prices over the recent months. From July, when the change takes effect, households will see their average gas and electricity bill fall from the 2,500 a year level set by the government's energy price guarantee. However, those who struggle to pay their bills over the winter will feel little relief because the government top up worth £400 between October and March will have come to an end. Households also face being charged an extra £10 a year on their energy bills from October to bolster the profits of their energy provider, under plans put forward by the regulator alongside the new cap. Ofgem has proposed increasing the amount of profit suppliers can make from 1.9% to 2.4% to prevent them going bust. But because of the cost of bailing out, a failed supplier would be higher. Under the plan, annual suppliers' profits would climb from £37 a household to £47. Under the new cap, the average energy bill will remain almost double at level seen in October 2021, when Russia began restricting supplies of gas to Europe in a move that sent wholesale prices soaring. Before the energy crisis, the typical household paid around £1,271 a year in gas and electricity. Households could still face a dual fuel bills above £2,074 if they use more energy than typical of the amount, because Ofgem's cap limits the rate energy suppliers can charge customers for each unit of gas and electricity, but not the total bill. The cap does offer help to businesses, charities, or public sector organisations such as schools, hospitals, and care homes. Commenting, SNP Energy spokesperson Alan Brown said, Scottish families are paying the price for Westminster failure, with the typical household energy bill double what it was in 2021, and wages falling short of inflation rates, showing exactly why Scotland needs to escape Westminster control as an independent country. Scotland is an energy-rich country, and it's absurd that the UK government is forcing families to pay through the nose for a resource we have in abundance, while it refuses to reinvest the huge profits it is raking in from Scotland's North Sea oil and gas. Maureen, what do you make of this cap? It seems like it's got a couple of pitfalls. Do you think that it's nearly there, or it's just not the right path to be taking?
Well, I think we know that energy prices in the UK are not falling as fast as they should, and I think this price cap for next year is perhaps it is, in my view, too high for the coming year. I think prices of gas and therefore other sources, because all sources are based on the price of gas for some reason, I think it will fall further. So it is awful that households are still going to be paying through the nose in their energy bills in the next year. And we know that food inflation is still continuing, although overall inflation, because of the lowering of energy bills, is falling. Inflation is just not going up at such a fast rate as it did before. So I think this is little comfort for the vast majority of households. And as you said, they're not getting to get any help in the winter from the UK government this winter as opposed to last winter. And it is ridiculous that in Scotland we're energy rich but fuel poor. And I'm sure positive that we can do better as an independent country with the control of all these levers at a Scottish government level.
Mm-hmm. So our next story today, there's been calls for the UK government to amend or withdraw the retained EU law bill. Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson has urged the UK government to respect devolution by amending the retained EU law bill, which is the Revocation and Reform Bill, to include a requirement to seek consent from devolved governments. In a letter to the UK Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Kemi Badenoch, Mr. Robertson stressed the bill should be withdrawn, warning how it threatens the high standards Scotland had in place as an EU member. Mr. Robertson also outlined how the approach taken by the UK ministers on devolved consent largely ignores the views of the Scottish Parliament, citing a day's notice between asking the Scottish Parliament to consider the amendments to the bill and Lord Callaghan stating that it would proceed without consent. Maureen, I feel like you'll have a lot of thoughts about this. What do you make of Angus Robertson's calls for the change in the bill?
I think he has to do that, although I don't think that it's going to get very far. You're right to say that the Scottish Parliament gets very, very little notice about the so-called consent of the Scottish Parliament. It gets no time to scrutinise the legislation that we're asked to be giving our consent on. And it's really just, it has become a completely meaningless exercise because, as I say, there is no time for scrutiny about it, debate about it. It just comes on the order paper at 5 o'clock and you've got no idea what it's about. So you've just got to say yes or no. Normally it's just yes, but where you have got concerns about it, as I say, you've got no time to express that. And as you say, Westminster under the current administration, Tory administration, is just going to ignore it anyway. So it has become a very ridiculous part of the Scotland Act and devolution, because the UK government doesn't pay any attention to it really in terms of consulting. We're supposed to be a country of equal parliaments, but that's certainly not the case.
And for you, what's the reason that they don't give any notice or any decision time? Do you think that it is they don't want to hear what Holyrood has to say, or do you think that they're actively trying to shut down the voice of Holyrood?
I think it's all of those, and probably incompetence, because they don't see it as something important, and the civil servants are not instructed to pass on these pieces of legislation to the Scottish Parliament in enough time for us to consider it. But I do think they just think this. Westminster thinks that this is a meaningless exercise and treat the devolved parliaments with utter contempt.
Do you think that they project the same attitude that they do to Holyrood that they do in Northern Ireland and Wales, or do you think it's particularly bad for Scotland?
I'm not sure. Obviously, it's not relevant at the moment because Northern Ireland isn't sitting. I think Wales have the same problems, but they have fewer powers, although it's catching up. But it's probably affects Scotland more than the other devolved countries.
Yeah. I guess they've got more powers, so there's more powers for Westminster to. So our next story. Gypsy, Roma and travellers have been reported today as suffering persistent discrimination in the UK. This discrimination has been described as troublingly persistent against Gypsy, Roma and travellers, which is abbreviated to GRT, in the UK, an expert group in Europe's leading human rights body has found. The Council of Europe Committee said that GRT communities suffer shocking amounts of bullying in the education system, prejudice reporting in the media, and threats to their legal status and rights, including as a result of recent legislative changes. In an opinion published today, it says the definition of gypsy for planning purposes excludes those who have permanently ceased traveling. This means that ethnic gypsies and travelers may be denied their status. There is also systematic shortages of sites resulting from local authorities' willingness, opposition from local residents, and there is a new definition reducing the number of sites required in need more assessment. Moreover, the authorities have criminalized trespass with a vehicle in the Police Crime Sentencing and Court Act. This act appears to the minority as the criminalization of the option of last resort of gypsies and travelers in England, and it is difficult for the minority itself to discern the difference between that and forced assimilation. The fear this act has sparked is profound within the minority communities. As well as the PCSCA, the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities says other legislative changes and proposals raised concerns, including the Nationalities and Borders Act, which allows citizens to be stripped without notice, and threats to the Human Rights Act. The committee also noted strong increases in hate crime targeting other minorities, notably the Jewish and Muslim communities, and called for greater support for linguistic minorities, including Cornish. Its recommendations include Cornish being on the national curriculum and adequate funding to make available to Cornish organizations providing minority language education, teacher training, or developmental educational materials. It has also said that there should be a comprehensive strategy in England and Northern Ireland to tackle anti-Gypsyism to combat a widely held prejudice against this minority. So we were talking earlier in the show about the institutionalized racism in Police Scotland. How do you think that this ties in with that story? And do you think in Scotland that there is this same kind of anti-Gypsyism, anti-GRT sentiment?
Yes, I'm a bit confused about this report. Is it for the whole of the UK, or is it just for countries under Westminster jurisdiction at the moment? I'm not sure if it mentions Scotland very much at all, but I mean, I despair at the initial reaction to traveller camps and gypsy camps being set up near people. And in the northeast of Scotland, we had a particular problem with the local newspapers kind of leading on this. I would just like everybody to remember that we are all from nomads. We all travelled to get food or shelter or work, and being settled is a kind of continuation of that. And some people are not ready to settle and quite like still traveling around. If you think about tribes and people in Africa, for example, who have to move for food and water, it's all a process of civilization, isn't it? And people who immediately react to gypsies and travellers in their neighbourhood, to me, is so unkind and so lacking in humanity, because the point is that they move on. So I think it's really incumbent, and more local authorities are seeing this, that they need to set up skips and toilet facilities for them when they're there, and provide more camps. But there again, people object to the camps wherever local authorities try to meet their obligations to provide for Gypsy, Roma and traveller people. I always used to love the travellers coming to near our house when we grew up to the farm, because my mum would send us off to our bedrooms to get rid to see if we've got any clothes that we're finished with or grown out of. We can pass them on to the gypsies while she prepared food for them. So I have got no discrimination to these people who, in old days did come and fix your pots and pans in return for food and things.
And what do you make of the proposed plans to introduce Cornish, the Cornish language? And do you see any parallels between Cornish and the kind of attempt to reintroduce Gaelic back into Scotland as well? What do you make of these kinds of parallels?
Well, I'm quite surprised to see the importance that has been placed on Cornwall and Cornish language in this report when the UK government is and Tories are great at saying that we should all be monoglots and we shouldn't be speaking Gaelic or Scots or Doric, and that they're all rubbish languages in their view. Most countries are not monoglot. Most countries speak a wide variety of languages. Recognize them when you land in their countries. You're asked, in Spain if you want your phone in Spanish, Catalan, or whatever. I think Britain is particularly awful in this field, and we should be encouraging languages. It's great that in education in Scotland, your language from home continues into school, and that people are not immediately forced to speak English if they spoke Gaelic or Scots or Doric previously. That those languages are built on, and I think it's terrible that in the UK we expect everybody throughout the world to speak English and we make no attempt. And as someone who speaks French and German fairly fluently, I hate that, and I've made sure that my kids hate that idea too.
So, moving on to our next story, a Rwandan ex-police chief was arrested in South Africa today over the 1994 genocide. One of the world's most wanted genocide suspects, a Rwandan former police chief, Felicien Kayishema, has been arrested in South Africa and charged with playing a leading role in the murder of more than 2,000 people in a church in 1994. Kayishema has spent more than 2 decades as a fugitive and was living under a false name at the time of his arrest on Wednesday afternoon in Paarl, 35 miles northeast of Cape Town. He was detained by South African police and members of a tracking team from the Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal based in Arusha, Tanzania. Sergei Bramertz, the tribunal's chief prosecutor who led the hunt, said Felicien Kayishema was a fugitive for more than 20 years. His arrest ensures that he will finally face justice for his alleged crimes. Kayishema, 62, was one of the 4 suspects indicted by the tribunal who were still not accounted for, from a total of 96 indicted, and he was possibly the last major suspect still alive and at large. The tribunal only indicted the leading perpetrators. There are still more than 1,000 others wanted by Rwandan prosecutors for their alleged role in the genocide, in which more than 500,000 people were killed in 100 days. Bramertz serves as a prosecutor for the residual mechanism set up in 2010 to deal with outstanding cases from international criminal tribunals for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. All 161 indicted suspects from the former Yugoslavia have been accounted for. At the time of the genocide in 1994, Kayishema was a Hutu police inspector in Rwanda's Kivumu commune in the north of the country. He is accused of playing a leading role, rounding up the Tutsis in the area and confining them in a compound of a parish church in a settlement of Nyange, where some of the Tutsis had already sought refuge. The church was surrounded by Kayishema's police and members of the Hutu Interahamwe militia, who launched an attack on thousands of civilians inside on the 13th of April 1994, hacking at them with machetes and throwing grenades into the crowd. The survivors, many of them women and children and the elderly, barricaded themselves in the church as the siege went on for 3 days. A bulldozer was brought in to demolish the church, bringing its roof down on the people inside. Anyone found alive in the ruins was killed. Maureen, this is a huge, it's a huge step forward for the justice for the relatives of the survivors of the genocide. Do you think that, this is reparative justice? This is the ICC doing everything that it should be? What do you make of this story?
Yes, it's an interesting story to come out now, and not particularly good reading for the Home Secretary and her bids to send migrants from that come to the UK to Rwanda. Obviously, I don't think they paid much attention to history. It's good to know that there are bodies still hunting down people who have um, committed the crimes of these terrible genocides. And I'm presuming from what you said, Saoirse, that they will be brought to The Hague to be tried for these criminal acts. I hope that's the case, and I hope perhaps as a result of getting on, others may be caught too, but not a good look for the UK government at this particular time.
So yeah, he's now in custody and will be tried by the ICC at The Hague. So our next story, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has announced officially his 2024 presidential bid. So this is where he has officially declared his candidacy for the Republican nomination for president. He rolled out the news with a campaign video and a glitch-ridden event on Twitter with the owner of the social media site, Elon Musk. DeSantis filed paperwork on Wednesday with the Federal Election Commission before his planned event with Musk and an interview with Fox News later on Wednesday evening. As governor of Florida, DeSantis has pursued divisive, culture war-focused policies, including signing a 6-week abortion ban and targeting the teaching of LGBTQ+ in school with his policy Don't Say Gay and race issues in public schools. In his campaign video, DeSantis said that he was running to lead our great American comeback and pitched Florida as a model for the nation. "We've proved it can be done," DeSantis said in a voiceover. "We chose facts over fear, education over indoctrination, law and order over rioting and disorder." He retains support from powerful donors and has amassed significant campaign funds and is consistently a clear second to Donald Trump in the polling of the Republican field. DeSantis kicked off his campaign with an hour-long live interview on Twitter Spaces with Elon Musk. The event, billed as groundbreaking by the billionaire Twitter owner, got off to a rocky start after technical issues crashed the audio live stream several times, leading to minutes of silence. Once things got rolling, DeSantis took swipes at the media, COVID public health mandates, and what he branded as the woke Olympics of the West. Is reinforcing his hardline agenda on education and immigration, realms where he has pushed unprecedented authoritarian measures as governor, and he vowed to go further than Donald Trump had been able to. DeSantis has also embroiled himself in a controversial power of struggle with Disney, one of the largest employers in the state. Disney opposed DeSantis' so-called Don't Say Gay law, which targeted the teaching of gender and LGBTQ issues. In return, DeSantis sought to remove the self-governing powers of the company that it has enjoyed around its resort near Orlando. Democrats, political observers, and pollsters say DeSantis has moved too far to the right to appeal to general election voters should he overhaul Trump to win the Republican nomination. Maureen, on that last bit, do you think that DeSantis has gone too far right to appeal to the wider American public?
I hope, in the case of the wider American public, that is the case. For anyone who thinks that he is a softer version of Trump, hopefully they can see now that he absolutely isn't. And you wouldn't have thought that you could get anybody more far right than Trump, but this is actually happening in the United States in terms of the Republican candidacy. I hope more will enter the race who are a bit more measured, shall we say, in what they stand, what platform they stand on. Um, but it'll be interesting to see whether Trump still holds the major sway among Republicans or not. As you said, he pitched that he wants everywhere in the US to be like Florida, and he also said that he was totally anti-woke. Um, One thing that interested me was I heard that someone said that in terms of far right politics, the UK or Westminster and the Tories are about 3 years behind. So, is this what we can expect if we're still furled to Westminster? A scary prospect, but the US politics and US candidacies for president always make very interesting reading.
That's a really, really terrifying, really terrifying thought there. But we'll leave you at home with that one. So our next story, the Scottish Government has published its medium-term financial strategy. Economic growth, progressive taxation, and spending plans that unapologetically target those in the greatest need are at the heart of the financial strategy announced by Deputy First Minister Shona Robertson. The medium-term financial strategy outlines the approach to ensuring Scotland's finances are on a sustainable footing and delivering high-quality public services in the face of high inflation. These policies include growing the economy, including by delivering on ambitious commitments to childcare, seizing opportunities in areas where Scotland has a competitive advantage, and supporting entrepreneurs, startups, and scale-ups. Taking tough decisions around spending, focusing on what is needed to achieve the missions of equality, opportunity, and community. Updating the tax strategy with a new advisory group to be established this summer and chaired by the Deputy First Minister. The strategy details the tough choices required in the challenging financial circumstances. Scottish Government estimates indicate that due to inflation, pay increases, and the lack of further funding from the UK government, current resource spending requirements could exceed funding of £1 billion in the next financial year and £1.9 billion in the year 27 to 28. The gap between capital spending commitments and funding could rise to 16% in 2025 to 26. Ms. Robertson said, "We are steadfast in our commitment to tackling poverty, building a fair, green and growing economy and improving our public services to make them fit for best need for the future generations. But we must recognise that our current financial situation is among the most challenging since devolution, driven by the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the recent period of high inflation. Our funding remains largely based on decisions made by the UK government, but they have failed to take the steps required to inflation-proof our budgets. And their decisions from Brexit and the disastrous mini-budget have only made matters worse. This is creating substantial pressure on our public services, which we have no choice but to address." Maureen, what's your opinion on the short-term financial goals? Do you think that they are achievable? Do you think it's a realistic plan laid out by Holyrood?
I think it's good, but I think it's very challenging. I think it's important to recognise that as well as providing a service, childcare and care of the elderly are also businesses. And if they grow, then more people are employed and there's more tax take from them. So it's really interesting to see that's been highlighted. I think there's also further growth that can be had in the good companies that we already have, and it's difficult for um, Holyrood itself to show that there's stability in the system, and it's good, providing good conditions for growth, even though we want that, with so many prime ministers in Westminster and not knowing what's going to happen there, that it kind of destabilizes the situation a bit. But we've always got to remember that, as you highlighted, that the Scottish Government is um, restricted by a fixed budget and limited borrowing powers. And what we've set out would be much more easily achieved if we had full fiscal powers and full autonomy over the resources of Scotland to make sure that our aims can be achieved in a much more proper manner and a much more determined manner.
So, staying with the Scottish Government, our final full story of the night, the Scottish Government has laid plans to introduce a visitor levy legislation. The bill to enable councils to invest more in local tourism facilities and services through a levy on overnight stays has been published. If passed by the Scottish Government, the Visitor Levy Scotland Bill will give councils the power to apply levies on stays in overnight accommodation based on a percentage of the accommodation cost. All money raised would have to be reinvested locally on facilities and services substantially for or used by visitors, enhancing the tourist experience and benefiting local communities and their economies. Under plans, councils would be required to consult communities, businesses, and tourism organisations before putting the visitor levy in place. They would also have to consult on how any of this revenue should be spent. The proposals follow public consultations and form a part of the New Deal for local government, which gives councils greater financial flexibility and strengthens local democracy. The Scottish Government has invited representatives from the tourism industry, COSLA, and other partners to join an expert group to consider how best it might be implemented if passed. Public Finance Minister Tom Arthur said Scotland is already a very popular tourist destination, and the domestic and international visitors we welcome every year have a significant positive impact on the Scottish economy. Giving councils the power to introduce a visitor levy is one tool that will provide additional resources to continue to attract visitors to Scotland. Just one last quick comment, Maureen. Are you in favour of a visitors levy, or is it not something that you would support?
I think, given the lack of cash, both at national and local level, I think this enabling legislation, because that's what it is, it's going to enable councils to, if they want to, having discussed it with their local communities, introduce the levy. And we know, for example, that Edinburgh does want it. I think the Highlands too, because they need to upgrade roads for the North Coast 500 and facilities around the North Coast 500. So it will be entirely up to councils to do it. But I think it's good that the Scottish Government is providing this overarching enabling legislation, and that councils are not going their own way and doing what they want in terms of the overall legislation. Obviously, they can set the amount of money on the levy themselves, I would think. But I think this should be seen as what it is, enabling legislation, and then councils will decide themselves. I'm sure there'll be resistance from the tourism sector, but it doesn't stop people going to Berlin, for example, where there's a tax when you stay in a hotel and other places. So As you said, so many people want to come to Scotland for other things. I doubt an extra pound or whatever per night is going to put them off.
Be interesting to see. So, our final section of tonight, we just wanted to take a minute to remember the Capia massacre. About 28 years ago, about this time of the evening, in the city of Tuzla in Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the deadliest war crimes of the Bosnian War happened when the Bosnian Serb army fired 2 shells which landed on Capia Square. This killed 71 young people and left 240 people wounded. Whilst most of those killed were aged 18 to 25, the youngest victim was 3 years old. And so that's everything for this evening. Thank you so much, Maureen, for being my guest tonight. You've had fabulous answers to all of my questions. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
And before I go, I just wanted to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our viewers, our supporters. So to everyone who's donated and signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programs will, of course, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers, which will enable us to employ staff and make much more programs for you to enjoy at home. I'm Saoirse Healey. Thank you so much for watching and good night.